Hello, reading room. It is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am here on day 224. It's a scorcher out there, let me tell you. It is. Here in Michigan, July 24th, day 224, scorcher. But we're going to bring it down a level or two, or up and then back up a level. Probably, in our book, A Dangerous Idea, the Scopes Monkey Trial, the original fight over science in the schools. Let's get going. We are on chapter number 17, Someone's Speechless. I know who it is. I saw the movie. And I'm very interested to see what the book has to say about this part of it. It's very interesting to me. Lucy, hush. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. John's legal team had no intention of letting him tell his story. Judge Ralston asked whether the defendant would be taking the witness stand to testify in his own defense. Your Honor, Clarence said, every single word that was said against the defendant, everything was true. So he does not care to go on the stand? The judge asked. He's probably bummed. No, said John's defender. What is the use? The defense lawyer did have a story they wanted to tell. It just wasn't John's story. Clarence and his co-counsel had tapped 12 distinguished experts, all accomplished in their fields, to take the witness stand and tell this story. Among them was the rector of an Episcopal church in Knoxville, who would testify that the biblical stories were meant as allegories. A Methodist pastor from Chattanooga would point out that the Genesis story was silent on the process of the creation of human beings. Yes, God created man, but the Bible didn't say how. Another expert witness was the dean of the Divinity School of the University of Chicago, who would say that the two creation stories in Genesis were religious interpretations by ancient writers who used their best knowledge of the universe at the time. They knew Catholics would not agree with the Bible. Then there was a Jewish scholar who would remind everyone that because the Bible was originally written in ancient Hebrew, the English Bible was, by definition, an interpretation. Every translation is an interpretation. The King James Bible, so popular among Protestant churches and from which Judge Ralston read at the beginning of the trial, was riddled with translation errors, as well as interpretations in the story of Genesis and elsewhere. Biblical literalists then were choosing to take as fact an English interpretation of a text that was written in an ancient language full of ambiguities and unfathomable phrases. That's the best you're getting out of me with that word. There were zoologists, an anthropologist, a soil scientist, a psychologist. There was a state geologist of Tennessee. One person there wasn't: the defendant. So I sat speechless, John later wrote in his memoir of the trial, a ringside observer at my own trial until the end of the circus. Speechless, but not surprised. This defense strategy had been an open secret even before the trial started. Everyone knew that Clarence Darrow wanted to put creationism and biblical literalism on trial. Everyone understood that the ACLU wanted to advance freedom of thought, speech, and teaching. And frankly, the organization wouldn't cry too hard over a guilty verdict, because that would allow the ACLU to appeal the judgment to a higher court, even to the Supreme Court of the United States. A Supreme Court decision in their favor would create a rule of law that applied across the nation. A verdict out of a country courthouse in Tennessee wouldn't have nearly the same legal impact. And if John were found not guilty, that would get him off the hook. But it wouldn't get the ACLU the far-reaching ruling they wanted. Well, before the trial started, observers mused that John was a scapegoat for a larger cause, a sort of scapegoat, as one newspaper correspondent wrote. I'm literally analyzing the handwriting, if you wanted to know what I was doing there. There's a telegram. As in, whose is it? Not what does it mean? So, let's get out our magic magnifying glass. That not by magic, but by science, I can see things. So this is a telegram, and it's a cablegram to all the world is what it says. Send the following telegram subject to the terms on back hereof, which are hereby agreed to. Multiple telegram, July 7th, 1925. Distinguished colleagues of yours have suggested you might be willing to come to testify for defense at Dayton, Tennessee next week in the case of State of Tennessee versus Professor Scopes. Stop. We of the defense world would be delighted to add your authority to our position. Stop. Your expenses will be paid. Stop. Will you wire me directly at Dayton, and I will let you know what day you will be needed. I realize how ridiculous that looks. I should have at least done this. Okay. And it's signed Clarence Darrow. So something's crossed out. I can't read it. And then it says Wolf, 5490, 5500, and two arrows there. What is that? The Wolf of Wall Street? Charge Science Services is what it says. And then day letter paid. Okay, so a telegram, and certainly since it's the trial of the century probably, and still talked about now, and still interested in reading about now, then probably what they were looking for was to come here and be a part of it. Absolutely, and all my expenses paid? I get to go to Dayton, Tennessee? Woohoo! No, I get to go to the Scopes trial. Happens to be in Dayton, Tennessee. I'll leave it up here like this for the last paragraph. After all the planning and strategizing, now at last the defense called its first witness to the stand. Maynard M. Metcalf, a scientist with expertise in biology in general and zoology in particular. He was a professor of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and had served on a federal government research committee. He was, as Clarence made sure to bring out in his introductory comments, an active church member. Okay, I have to say again about this zoology, no credibility. That to me, you lose credibility, you can gain it back. Maybe Johns Hopkins, I don't know. But zoology, you lose credibility. It's not a science. And what you did was you established it as a science without any evidence of it being so you're not a scientist. That's zoology. Yeah, it's a zoo over there about what science is. Will you state what evolution is? Clarence asked, in regard to the origin of man. Immediately, Attorney General Stewart stood to object. We accept to that, he said. We are accepting, Your Honor, to everything here that pertains to evolution or to anything that tends to show that there might or might not be a conflict between the story of the divine creation and evolution. This was the prosecution's position. The jury didn't need to be schooled in either evolution or religion. There need not and should not be any expert discussion of whether a person could believe in the Bible and believe in evolution. As far as the Butler Act was concerned, teaching evolution was a crime. Whether the teaching did or did not also deny the story of creation was irrelevant. After some back and forth, Judge Ralston decided that he would hear Dr. Metcalf's testimony, but the jury would not, at least not yet. He sent them out to the courtyard, warning them not to listen to the loudspeakers so they would not be tainted by evidence that he might ultimately decide was not valid. Don't listen to those loudspeakers out there projecting to miles away what's going on here. And so out marched the 12 jurors again. So much for their front row seats to the show. I'm looking for a mosquito. I'm afraid a mosquito might be in here. I hear a fly. Getting out of that intense heat. Uh-oh. When they were gone, Clarence asked Dr. Metcalf once again, what is evolution? The professor tutored the judge as best he could. It was late, going on 5 p.m., and the courtroom was hot as ever. Evolution meant change, he said. When scientists spoke of the evolution of a plant or animal, they meant the whole series of such changes which have taken place during hundreds of millions of years, from the organism's lowly beginnings to something much more complex. Judge Ralston leaned forward in his chair, interested. Dr. Metcalf was humble about the state of scientific knowledge. There was so much that scientists didn't know about how evolution worked. There are dozens of theories of evolution, some of which are almost wholly absurd, some of which are surely largely mistaken, he conceded, some of which are perhaps almost wholly true. But we are in possession of scientific knowledge to answer directly and fully the question, has evolution occurred? The answer was absolutely yes. How far back could scientists trace the existence of life on Earth? Clarence asked. Oh, that is an awfully hard question to answer in years, Dr. Metcalf replied. No geologist talks years. It is ages. More than 6,000 years ago, wasn't it? Clarence asked. He did not pull that number out of the air. Biblical literalists often insisted that God's creation occurred 6,000 years ago. Clarence's point was that fossil evidence proved such calculations to be fanciful. Well, 600 million years ago is a very modest guess, Dr. Metcalf said. Laughter erupted in the courtroom. Impossible. 600 million? People whispered in amazement and revulsion. He is about as authoritative as an evening breeze, one skeptic said. Interested as he may have been, Judge Ralston was also tired. Colonel Darrow, will this extend very much further? He asked. It has been a pretty hard day for me. This time Clarence didn't press on, and the judge adjourned court until the next morning. As the lawyers were getting ready to go, Will walked over to Clarence smiling. A friend of mine sent me this and asked me to give it to you, he said. It's carved from a peach pit, and it's so pretty, I'd like you to keep it. It was, what else? A tiny monkey. Carved from a peach pit? I want to see that. Where the heck is that picture? I don't believe it. A friendly moment between antagonists Clarence Darrow on the left and William Jennings Bryan inside the courtroom during a break in the trial, July 1925. And as you can see, we are on chapter 18, The Greatest Speech. Oh, Clarence Darrow, look at you. He looks a little like William F. Buckley, Clarence Darrow. And they do look like they're two meeting opponents, almost like Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley. And in that same kind of little bit of a weird way, they seem like they are, you know what, kissing cousins. I'm saying. I don't know. The greatest speech. I certainly do not diminish their oratory skills. I don't know what the right word is. On the fifth day of creation, the Bible said God caused the waters of the earth to teem with living creatures. On the fifth day of John Scope's trial, Thursday, July 16th, the courtroom of Judge John T. Ralston teemed with living creatures too. So many living creatures were teeming in his second floor courtroom that the judge feared the floor might collapse. Do not make any manifestations, he begged the spectators. No clapping or foot stomping. I do not want to alarm you, he said. I do not know myself, for I am not a mechanic, but I do know that the floor is heavily weighted and the least vibration might cause something to happen and applause might start trouble. The platform in front of the judge's bench also teemed with a particular species of living creatures on the fifth day, lawyers. They'd been sitting at their lawyer's table all week, of course. Today, though, fully 7 of them would enter the arena and make speeches. William Jennings Bryan Jr. for the prosecution, Arthur Garfield Hayes for the defense, Sue Hicks for the prosecution, Ben McKenzie for the prosecution, William Jennings Bryan, the original, for the prosecution, Dudley Field Malone for the defense, and Tom Stewart for the prosecution. It would be an oratorical extravaganza. The professed purpose was to argue the relevance or irrelevance of the defense's scientific and theological expert witnesses. In other words, should the judge let the jury hear the experts on evolution or not? As far as the court case was concerned, this was a technical legal issue, but with the whole country, except for the jury listening, it was poised to be a whole lot more. Actually, one reporter wrote, the speeches were addressed to a jury constituting all the intelligence of the world. The great attraction was Will Bryan, of course. When word got out that he would be breaking his silence on this day, finally, the locals flocked to the courthouse. But as they mobbed the doorway, police were there to enforce Judge Ralston's new rule. There would be no more spectators than there were seats, and the seats were quickly taken. The reporter, determined to keep his place in the courtroom, brought a heavy chain and padlock to secure his chair. Disappointed spectators retreated to the courthouse square, where they could listen to the loudspeakers. They didn't miss much at first. There was the prayer, naturally, short and sweet, but definitely with a point of view. We pray thy blessings upon the deliberations of this court, to end that thy word may be vindicated. There was William Jennings Bryan Jr. He has none of the fire of his father, decided one reporter, a judgment shared by others. Arthur Hayes and Sue Hicks followed. Not much of a show, either of them. Before the lunch break, prosecutor Ben McKenzie provided some entertainment. I want to say this, he started. Since the beginning of this lawsuit, and since I began to meet these distinguished gentlemen, I have begun to love them, every one, and it is a very easy task. In fact, it was a case, when I met Colonel Darrow, a case of love at first sight. These other gentlemen come right on, but you know they wiggled around so rapidly that I could not get my lover turned loose on them until I got a chance. But I love the great men. Unusual, but not one-sided, as Clarence later wrote, he found Ben McKenzie most agreeable and even lovable, and they formed a strong bond. After all, he added, men in all lands and at all times have been found human and loving outside their religious attitudes. When he was done showering his opponents with love, Mackenzie showered the idea of evolution with ridicule. Evolutionists, he said, want to put words into God's mouth and have him to say that he issued some sort of protoplasm or soft dish rag and put it in the ocean and said, oh boys, if you wait around about 6,000 years, I will make something out of you. That got a good laugh from the audience. Over the lunch adjournment, the sheriff installed ceiling fans in the courtroom. The room was still a steam bath, a very full steam bath. Half an hour before the court was called back in session, crowds pressed into the room. Once again, the aisles were full. The judge's admonition against standing room only spectators was largely ignored. The great commoner was up next. To heck with the rules. Looking at the multitudes in front of him, the judge again worried aloud. I do not know how well it is supported, but sometimes buildings and floors give away when they are unduly burdened, he said. So I suggest to you to be as quiet as the courtroom as you can. Have no more motion than you can avoid, especially have no applause, because it isn't proper in the courtroom. Hundreds of people hushed themselves. Well, Judge Ralston said, I believe Mr. Bryan then will speak next for the state. Will took a long drink from the 3-gallon jug of water on the table in front of him. He stood, his jaw set. He wore no jacket, submitting to the heat, but a collar was affixed to his shirt, and he wore his usual black tie. In his left hand, he held the palm leaf fan. He began quietly, calmly. The Butler Act was perfectly clear in outlawing the teaching of evolution. The state of Tennessee was within its rights to tell its teachers, paid for with taxes raised by its citizens, what they could teach. The people of Tennessee did not want their children learning about evolution. Experts should not now be permitted to undo the law because they thought it was bad law. Perspiration glistened on Will's head. So far, he'd presented a fairly lawyerly and logical argument. Now he picked up the high school textbook, the outlawed book. He called it Hunter's A Civic Biology, and he shifted gears to tear apart evolution, which he said commences with nothing and ends nowhere. In particular, Will was going to tear apart page 194 of the book that John had used in the class. The Christian believes man came from above, he began, but the evolutionist believes he must have come from below. On page 194, we have a diagram, Will continued. We are told just how many animal species there are, 518,900. Will pointed out that the diagram classified animals by different groups, from protozoa to mammals, with each group in the chart is represented by a circle. The insert circle was the largest because the text said, the insect circle was the largest because the text said insects accounted for the largest number of species, 360,000. The mammal circle was small with 3,500 species, but not the smallest. So here you have a picture from, let's see, this page from A Civic Biology was ridiculed by William Jennings Bryan in his courtroom presentation on July 16th, 1925. Well, look at that. How about that? 100 years ago. We're talking this month. 100 years ago. How unbelievable is that? So here we've got these numbers. I'll read this. It says, the doctrine of evolution. We have now learned that animal forms may be arranged so as to begin with very simple one-celled forms and culminate with a group which contains man himself. This arrangement is called the evolutionary series. Evolution means change, and these groups are believed by scientists to represent stages in complexity of development of life on the earth. Geology teaches that millions of years ago, life upon the earth was very simple, and that gradually more and more complex forms of life appeared as the rocks formed latest in time show the most highly developed forms of animal life. Rocks? That's what we're evolving to? Rocks? Are you sure not rock stars? The great English scientist Charles Darwin, from this and other evidence, explained the theory of evolution. This is the belief that simple forms of life on Earth slowly and gradually gave rise to those more complex, and that thus ultimately the most complex forms came into existence. I don't see the rocks. So I'm going to have to think about that a little bit. And you do that on your 4 days off. This is the belief that simple forms of life on Earth... The number of animal species, over 500,000 species of animals, are known to exist today as the following table shows. And there is the following table of the species as presented in a civic biology, a science book. All right, we'll hold it like that in a minute. The smallest circle was amphibians, to which it was attributed 1,400 species. I see they are round numbers, Will said, and I don't think all of these animals breed in round numbers. And so I think it must be a generalization of theirs. Laughter in the courtroom. The trial transcript reads, "Let us have order," the judge warned. 8,000 protozoa, 3,500 sponges, Will read. "I am satisfied from some I have seen there must be more than 35,000 sponges." More laughs. "And then we run down to the insects, 360,000 insects. 2/3 of all of the species of all the animal world are insects. And sometimes in the summertime, we feel that we become intimately acquainted with them. Now we are getting up near our kinfolks. 13,000 fishes. Then there are the amphibia. I don't know whether they have not yet decided to come out or have almost decided to go back." Will continued to get laughs. "And then we have the reptiles, 3,500. And then we have 13,000 birds. Strange that this should be exactly the same as the number of fishes, round numbers. And then we have mammals, 3,500, Will said, and there is a little circle, and man is in the circle. Find him. Find man." The diagram did not actually place man on the little circle labeled mammals, but it was true that on the next page, the textbook confirmed that man is indeed a mammal. "There is that book," he cried. "There is the book they were teaching your children, that man was a mammal and so indistinguishable among the mammals that they leave him there with 3,499 other mammals." Hold on. Now the audience was applauding as well as laughing, "Including elephants?" he added. Excellent comic timing. Talk about putting Daniel in the lion's den. Will raised his arms in mock terror. How dare those scientists put man in a little ring like that with lions and tigers and everything that is bad? Not only the evolution is possible, but the scientists possibly think of shutting man up in a little circle like that with all these animals that have an odor that extends beyond the circumference of this little circle, my friends. Extended laughter, reads the trial's transcript. Evolutionists put man in the same little circle as stinky beasts. So here we have William Jennings Bryan making his big argument against evolution in court. Tell me that the parents of this day have not any right to declare that children are not to be taught this doctrine. Will declaimed, shall not be taken down from the high plane on which God put man, shall be detached from the throne of God and be compelled to link their ancestors with the jungle. Tell that to these children? Why, my friends, if they believe it, they go back to scoff at the religion of their parents. Sweat dripped down Will's forehead. Now he held up Darwin's The Descent of Man. Darwinism proposed a family tree, Will asserted falsely, in which man descended from monkeys of the old world. It keeps saying falsely. That's just simply not true. That's exactly what they said. Now they're backing off, but that's exactly what they said. Didn't you read the chapter we read yesterday? That's what they said. Not even from American monkeys, he jokingly complained, but from old world monkeys. The audience dutifully laughed. Perhaps they'd heard or read this joke before. It was one of Will's staples. Now here we have our glorious pedigree, Will said, and each child is expected to copy the family tree and take it home to his family to be submitted for the Bible family tree. That is what Darwin says. Well, no, that was not what Darwin said. There is no doubt that Will spoke from the heart. Because this principle of evolution disputes the miracle, there is no place for the miracle in this train of evolution, and the Old Testament and the New are filled with miracles. And if this doctrine is true, this logic eliminates every mystery in the Old Testament and the New and eliminates everything supernatural. He spoke like a man who truly believed that evolution was a dangerous idea. They do not explain the great riddle of the universe. They do not deal with the problems of life. They do not teach the great science of how to live. And yet they would understand the faith of these little children in that God who stands back of everything and whose promise we have that we shall live with him forever by and by. But he also spoke like a man who understood very little about evolution. They say that evolution is a fact when they cannot prove that one species came from another. That's true. And if there is such a thing, all species must have come, commencing, as they say, commencing in that one lonely cell down there in the bottom of the ocean that just evolved and evolved until it got to be a man. That is true what evolution is saying. If Will wanted to find ideas in Hunter's A Civic Biology that were truly dangerous and deserving of ridicule and scorn, he could have turned a few pages. He could have mentioned page 196, for example. The races of man. At the present time, there exists upon the earth 5 races or varieties of man, each very different from the other in instincts, social customs, and, to an extent, in structure. These are the Ethiopian or Negro type originating in Africa, the Malay or brown race from the islands of the Pacific, the American Indian, the Mongolian or yellow race, including the natives of China, Japan, and the Eskimos, and finally the highest type of all, the Caucasians, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. But this did not attract Will's attention. This didn't cause him to raise an eyebrow, maybe because this paragraph wasn't much different from the proud statement in his memoir about being a member of the Caucasian race, which he dubbed the greatest race. This is getting good. And this is delicious. But I have to shake it up because I see that orange on the bottom there. This really, I'm not sure what the name brand is because it's not on here. It was really inexpensive, like 20 bucks for this. And it is just a great shake maker. I probably got it from Walmart. That's good. A little coffee chaser. And let's get back to it. Or if he was in search of an idea over which to express outrage, Will might have read a little further on inner civic biology to the author's discussion of eugenics. Hunter cited studies, later discredited, that allegedly demonstrated that generations of feeble-minded, alcoholic, immoral, or criminal persons were descended from couples in which one or both of the original parents had mental and moral defects. The discussion continued. Parasitism and its cost to society. Hundreds of families, such as those described above, exist today, spreading disease, immorality, and crime to all parts of this country. The cost to society of such families is very severe. Just as certain animals or plants become parasitic on other plants or animals, these families have become parasitic on society. They not only do harm to others by corrupting, stealing, or spreading disease, but they are actually protected and cared for by the state out of public money. Largely for them, the poorhouse and the asylum exist. They take from society, but they give nothing in return. They are true parasites. And this is in direct opposition to what they were saying in our story. And so you need to see our philosophical classroom right before this. We are talking exactly about this topic. Not to mention, I am giving myself a remedy, which is an energy therapy, which I call an energy therapy, electromagnetic light therapy. So an energy therapy for parasites, by the way. So where's your effing science if you think people have fucking parasites, you jackasses? Oh, that's science? Oh, I forgot. You're a zoologist. The remedy? If such people were lower animals, we would probably kill them off to prevent them from spreading. Humanity will not allow this, but we do have the remedy of separating the sexes in asylums or other places and in various ways preventing intermarriage and the possibilities of perpetuating such a low and degenerate race. You don't think that's what they're doing to me? You don't think that's what McLaren is doing to me? You don't think that's what the pharmaceutical companies are accusing me of? Remedies of this sort have been tried successfully in Europe and are now meeting with success in this country. But none of this, which was presented in teen readers as science, made its way, which was presented to teen readers as science, made its way into Will's screed against a civic biology. He was agitated that children were learning that human beings are mammals. But where was his outrage about the assertions right there in the book he was waving about that low and degenerate people, that human parasites should be snuffed out of the population? It was the heyday of eugenics in America. Even the defense's expert, Dr. Metcalf, supported it, and the great commoner failed to take a stand in court against the pseudoscience when it was practically staring him in the face. Instead, he took a stand against actual science. All right, there's a shame in that, but it's not fatal. Again, I have to say that there is an aspect of speaking to your audience. That's the difference. I said I would sit there and take it. I have this wherewithal, right? But I don't have that wherewithal, how to change. I'm hoping this changes people's hearts and minds. That's what I'm hoping, because that's the only way minds and hearts are really going to change anyway. So that's my strength. My son said, my daughter-in-laws, they don't just take it just sitting still. Great, because we need those people as well, right? We need those people as well. I'm going to stop putting lotion on my face. Sunscreen. Is that what your advice was, Julia Louise Dreyfus? Sunscreen? Guess what you don't get? Vitamin D when you have sunscreen on. Use your fucking head. Oh my gosh. Sorry, but I didn't think she had anything intelligent to say on Trevor Noah, which is why he talks to people for 2 hours and hers was 44 minutes. Sorry, girl. Used to be funny. Okay. Really, really great arguments in this book. And by the way, had he said, spoken out against this, and that he would have been ridiculed instead of applauded by that courtroom audience. If he had made these arguments, he would have been ridiculed by people who lived in Dayton, Tennessee, instead of applauded by that audience. Discretion is what it's called. It's called discretion. Okay. After more than an hour, Will concluded his argument. Face flushed, wiping his brow, he sat down to loud approving applause. The judge did not say a word about the possibility of the floor falling in. When the spectators heard that Dudley Malone, not Clarence Darrow, would be presenting the defense's final argument of the day, they quietly grumbled in disappointment. No head-to-head between their hero and the infidel? Their disappointments did not last long. Malone had endured 5 days in the roasting courtroom without once removing his suit jacket. Everyone had noticed. Now finally he took it off, and it was as if he'd called the room to attention. Everyone noticed. He methodically folded the coat and laid it on the table where the defense lawyers sat. Whether Mr. Bryan knows it or not, he began, he is a mammal. He is an animal, and he is man. But Malone wasn't there to ridicule Will. Will was my old chief friend, he explained. During Will's tenure as U.S. Secretary of State a decade earlier, Malone had been Undersecretary of State reporting to him. So Malone was speaking from a personal place as he expressed disappointment toward his one-time boss. Malone was disappointed that Will criticized religious beliefs because they did not completely align with his own. Malone was disappointed that Will's arguments aimed barbs at teachers. God knows, he boomed, the poorest paid profession in America is the teaching profession, who devote themselves to science, forego the gifts of God, consecrate their brains to study, and eke out their lives as pioneers in the fields of duty, finally hoping that mankind will profit by his efforts and to open the doors of truth. There has been nothing ever stated that just gives the purpose of a teacher and the motivation of a teacher like those words right there. If you are a true teacher, as I am, those are the words that describe you. I'm going to say it again. God knows the poorest paid profession in America is the teaching profession, who devote themselves to science, forego the gifts of God. consecrate their brains to study and eke out their lives as pioneers in the fields of duty, finally hoping that mankind will profit by his efforts and to open the doors of truth. I'm not an actress. I have no contract with Paramount or Universal Studios that I know of, and I've been forced into certain situations. Those things are true. But that's why, right there. And to open, hoping that mankind will profit by his or her efforts to open the doors of truth. And Malone was disappointed that Will spread misinformation, especially by focusing on what Darwin didn't know, and by refusing to acknowledge discoveries in biology, anthropology, and archaeology that were advancing the science of evolution. Haven't we learned anything in 75 years? Are we to have our children know nothing about science except what the church says they shall know? With his roaring voice, his embrace of religious faith, his concise delivery, Malone had his listeners spellbound. Clarence got up from the council table and stood against the rail that separated it from the speaker's platform, nodding vigorously as his co-counsel nailed point after point. We say keep your Bible, Malone urged. Keep it as your consolation. Keep it as your guide. But keep it where it belongs, in the world of your own conscience, not as a substitute for science class. I feel that the prosecution here is filled with a needless fear, Malone continued. If they would hear the defense experts, Malone said, they would see that scientists and teachers were not conspiring to destroy the morals of the children. Preachers, he reminded his listeners, were not the only people who cared about young people. Churches were not the only sources of morality, and sometimes not a source at all. And I would like to say something for the children of the country, Malone bellowed. We have no fears about the young people of America. They are a pretty smart generation. I feel that the children of this generation are probably much wiser than many of their elders. We have just had a war with 20 million dead. Civilization is not so proud of the work of the adults. Civilization need not be so proud of what the grown-ups have done. For God's sake, let the children have their minds kept open. Close no doors to their knowledge. Shut no door from them. When he finished, one observer wrote, there was the fraction of a second of silence of the same sort that is felt when the Metropolitan Opera House, after the tenor has reached the high note, and the pandemonium broke out. The audience shrieked and cheered in admiration. Applause vibrated the courtroom's still, stale air. Spectators, including fundamentalists, including Will Bryan's fans, crowded into the aisles and climbed over the rail to try to reach the lawyer from New York to congratulate him. Malone had talked for 20 minutes. The demonstration went on for nearly as long. Echoes of that evening in the Chicago Coliseum so many years ago when Will finished his Cross of Gold speech. Once again, the jury had missed the show, having been excluded by the judge. I forgot about that. Finally, Judge Ralston gavelled down the hubbub. The judge who'd paid close attention all afternoon was still trying to work things out in his mind. Under the defense's theory, he asked Clarence, might God have created man by a process of growth? Yes, Clarence responded, or by development. Yes, Clarence said. So the defense was saying that God did not manufacture him like a carpenter would a table? Yes, Clarence said. That is what we claim. And he added that was consistent with the Bible story. Attorney General Stewart gave the final argument of the day. He drew some applause from the audience, but as the afternoon came to close, the air was still electric with the charge of Dudley Malone's speech. After the crowds cleared out, only Malone, John, and Will remained. Dudley Will said to his former deputy, "That was the greatest speech I have ever heard." "Thank you, Mr. Bryan," Malone said to his former boss. "I am sorry it was I who had to make it." John Scopes standing between greatest speechmaker Dudley Field Malone on the left and Clarence Darrow on the right. We will come back after our 4 days off with chapter 19, something brand new. So we will be back in our reading room after 4 days off. Maybe this inspired you to, I don't know, you could read ahead. Why not? Or look up some other information on the greatest speech by Dudley Malone. Thanks so much for joining me. You know what? I'm going to go look right now at my 501 speeches and see if I've got Malone's speech. How about that? This is Dr. Annette Feravich taking my 4 days off seriously. This is day 224. We're all done with that. July 24th, a few things for me to do. No big plans right now. I know I'm going to be working on my leather notebook. I don't know how much though. I'm so satisfied right now that I got this done, not on my 4 days off, but on my 3 days on. And I just can't tell you how satisfied I am with it. I was planning this to be the front, right? And it probably should be. But I don't know why. I really do like this better. On camera, face to face, it's a toss-up. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I love the way these pens work as well. Beautiful pens, huh? All right, Dr. Annette Feravich, we are done. I don't need to drag this classroom out any longer. I got things to do. I'll see you guys back here in 4 days. Thanks.